Hello and welcome everybody to the China Registration and Compliance 2024 Roundup webinar. I'm Hamish King, I'm CEO at Cisema, and I'm joined by my colleague Victoria.
I'm Business Development and Marketing Director at Cisema.
Thank you very much for your time. We're going to speak around 30 minutes or so about a number of hot topics and some looking ahead for 2025. We're going to cover approval trends, the new draft law that has been issued, more about GBA fast track, some regulatory updates, and latest points around ongoing compliance. If you have any specific questions, please follow up after this webinar by email or by visiting our website. We also have a monthly newsletter which keeps you up to date with the latest changes in China regulatory and quality compliance.
And you can also stay up to date with our latest information on our LinkedIn pages and also on our Twitter feed as well. First up are the approval trends. So here you can see some recent data on the medical device trends over the last few years. So here you can see from 2018 through to 2023. This is the latest data that we have to date. The most recent data for 2024 will be released in the first quarter of 2025. So what we're sharing here are the number of applications that have been accepted by the NMPA, which is the authority that is responsible for all medical device approvals and certifications in China for everything for domestic class 3 and also international imported medical devices. So here you can see there's a split between medical devices as well as IVDs. It's roughly 3/4 medical devices and 1/4 IVDs. And in general, the trend is very much growing. As you can see, there's almost 25% increase in approvals in comparison to 2020. When we take a look at the registration trends in terms of Class 2 and Class 3, which are products that require an actual registration as opposed to a more simple filing application. The product groups, the top 5 product groups that were registered in 2021 were medical imaging equipment, passive implantable devices, dental instruments, neurological and cardiovascular surgical instruments, and ophthalmic devices. And here you can see 3 of those categories actually remain the same in 2023, although there's been sort of a slight shuffling in terms of their positioning. And we actually have a couple of new categories within the 2023 of stomatology devices and active surgical devices. So some clear categories that remain very much in demand in China over the years. In terms of the top registering countries, as you can see for the last 4 years, and we expect this to remain the same throughout 2024 and no doubt going forward, the top 4 countries remain the same and in the same position of being the USA, Germany, Japan, and South Korea. And within the next sort of the top 10 positions, there's sort of a competition between the next positionings between Switzerland, France, Italy, the United Kingdom, Sweden, and Israel. We also have sometime Italy entering there. The Netherlands has actually dropped out from 2020. So you can see there's sort of competition between the places, but pretty much it's the same countries that are the top 10 registering countries in China for importing their products to China. So there's been a big announcement this year, which Hamish will take us through now, please, about the draft law.
Sure. So there's been a new draft regulation announced. It is the first comprehensive law governing the development, production, operation, use standards, classification, vigilance, and recall of medical devices. And it means that medical devices will be governed by an overarching law at a similar level to pharmaceutical products. Previously, medical device regulation was more a subsidiary regulation within the broader drug law pharmaceutical framework. Here we present 6 aspects of the proposed law that we think are of particular interest for foreign manufacturers. Point 1, there will be a simplified market entry for foreign manufacturers by removing the requirement for home country approvals prior to registration or filing. That's quite exciting for international companies because it allows China to be a first-tier market able to compete with USA and Europe for a global rollout of a product. The draft law also proposes to allow, as a point 2, the use of real-world data as primary evidence rather than, as it is today, as supporting evidence for clinical data for registration purposes for medical devices or IVDs. This could help speed up some products and also tracks global developments. Point 3, the CMDE, the department responsible within NMPA for evaluating devices, is also proposing to allow for the transfer of registration certificates between companies as long as the new certificate owner fulfills all the requirements of a medical device registrant. This would help with M&A activities or other outsourcing activities within the China market. Point 4, independent local agents, also known as currently as NMPA legal agents, will now have more responsibilities, especially for product traceability, and they'll have a new name specifically of domestic responsible agent. This title will also reflect similar titles now given in the area of cosmetics and pharmaceuticals. And those are the 3 categories which NMPA regulates: pharmaceutical products, medical devices, and cosmetics. Point 5, the draft proposes to introduce a co-vigilance system similar to that for drugs so that manufacturers and DRAs or local agents take on more responsibility for monitoring adverse events and recalls. And point 6, finally, there's an increasing emphasis on innovation, on innovative devices that are brought to market through a green pathway, through priority and special reviews, and on top of this, support for international multi-center clinical trials. And we're already seeing some movement on the priority and innovative medical device pathways, which we'll cover shortly.
Great, thanks, Hamish. So next up, we're going to talk about the Greater Bay Area pathway, which is showing much interest this year.
Yeah, and the way we're going to dive into this is by starting with the overall map or picture that we like to talk about here at Cisema of ways to enter the Greater China market. First, we talk about the NMPA standard application, which not to diminish this pathway, but it is what 95% of products entering the market will utilize. That simply means where, as a manufacturer, you make your submission to the regulatory authority in Beijing as per the general requirements. The second pathway that we like to think about at Cisema is the accelerated pathways, which are an adjunct to the standard application. So they include priority review, emergency approval, conditional approval, dependent on your product innovation levels or needs in the market. And the specifically named innovative medical device application, or green channel as it's sometimes known, is the other larger category in this area that has taken on increasing importance over the last years as the Chinese regulation increasingly emphasizes innovation. The green channel or innovative device channel is of particular interest because it enables dedicated reviewers from NMPA early in the registration process before the product has even been submitted for a registration application. It also has benefits post-market because such products will generally sit outside any volume-based procurement requirements. The prerequisite that's important to mention is that you must have a China patent that covers the majority of the intended use of the device in order to be able to submit an innovative medical device application, which is approved prior to being able to submit the registration itself. Okay, so that's the more broader standard, or I should say NMPA bucket, and then we have the alternative pathways. The first we'll mention is, if we progress here, thank you, Victoria, the Hong Kong and GBA pathway, which is the broader category that we're interested in for this particular segment. Hong Kong itself has a separate regulatory framework for medical devices and IVDs and pharmaceutical products for that matter. In fact, medical devices can be imported to Hong Kong without pre-market approvals if it's to private clinical practices or organizations, hospitals. So it is voluntary to obtain a listing, as is technically known, and that listing has taken on more importance because it once a listing has occurred in Hong Kong, it now enables an application to be made to the GBA, to the Greater Bay Area, which includes around 80 million people, and a certain number of hospitals, around 45 at latest count, which is very exciting because it may enable faster access to a large subsection of the China population. The final bucket we mentioned briefly is Hainan. There's a specific medical tourism zone in China's Hawaii, which is an island off the south coast of China known as Hainan. The Hainan alternative pathway allows products that are registered in home country market to have fast access, a matter of months or even less, to sell into the Hainan market. And there are around 20 or even more hospitals at latest count in this small area of Hainan, catering to wealthier Chinese who are traveling for the best procedures that they can receive. And rather than going to Thailand or to other international markets, they can receive such care in Hainan within China mainland itself in a special dedicated zone. So that's a broad overview of the different pathways. And now we're going to dive in a little bit more detail about the GBA pathway because there have been some recent developments. And the most important thing to mention is that the number of hospitals has increased. Excuse me. The number of hospitals has increased over the last years since the pilot was first introduced in around 5 years ago or less. And from one hospital, the Shenzhen HKU hospital, that total number of hospitals that can now introduce products that are registered or listed in Hong Kong to the GBA market is at 45. And so far, 40 devices and 39 drugs have been introduced to the GBA market, despite not being approved in China mainland. So this is very interesting as a stepped pathway to the China market. The key point is, as we'll show on the next page, Victoria, that the pathway requires sponsoring by the relevant hospital, by one of those 45 hospitals. It's not you as a manufacturer going to the provincial MPA. You first need to find a hospital that wants to procure your product, and that hospital sees it as urgently needed, and sees it and believes that there's no similar product available for sale in China. This is what a pathway might look like into the China market as a broad strategy. You start with the relevant Hong Kong listing application that takes approximately 6 months, sometimes longer. Then you start to sell into Hong Kong hospitals, and you also start to speak to those GBA hospital procurement departments so that they can seek to purchase your products and sponsor your application to the Guangdong MPA. In parallel, you as a manufacturer can take some steps to smooth the regulatory burden by making a pre-filing with the relevant Medical Products Administration. After you start selling into one of these 45 hospitals, you can gather real-world data on Chinese population in China, and that can help support your eventual application to the NMPA in Beijing, which you still need to do if you want to sell China-wide. Let's stop there and then keep moving. But this gives you an idea of one possible China entry strategy via Hong Kong and GBA.
Great. Thanks, Hamish. So now we'll take a look at some of the other regulatory updates that has happened throughout 2024. So one of the interesting topics is a new regulation on good supply practices. In fact, it's named the Medical Device Business Quality Management Standards that came out in on July 1st of this year. In effect, so they are instructions for manufacturers, including obviously overseas manufacturers, on how to ensure distributors in China fulfill their obligations regarding, for example, complaints, adverse events, and recalls within China. So obviously this is some news that the NMPA is increasing its scrutiny and supervision of medical device distributors in China. And so from a regulatory perspective, it's essentially a guide on how to audit your medical device distributors in China and to ensure that they comply with this good supply practice standard. So what does it cover? So here you can see we've identified 5 main points. And in this, essentially it's asking you to verify that your distributor has a quality management system that complies with China requirements. It's also asking you to verify that your distributor is checking suppliers and buyer licenses and that it is maintaining all of those records. Also that your distributor has, traceable records for every stage of their product handling, and that your distributor is also conducting annual self-inspections. And in particular, if your product is a Class 2 or a Class 3 device in China, then a report must be submitted each year. So for the annual year of 2024, obviously this came into place in July. So for the last 6 months of 2024, then a report will need to be submitted by the 31st of March 2025 for these last 6 months of 2024. And so it's an annual year, January to December. A report will need to be submitted by the 31st of March of the following year to the NMPA on sort of a self-inspection to ensure that all the traceability, all the supplier licenses, etc., everything is running smoothly. And finally, it's also asking you to ensure that your distributor is respecting any specific device requirements, such as if you have a requirement for a temperature controlled environment, or that you have software releases and that data and security and full integrity is respected. So it is expected that at some point in the future, the NMPA will start inspecting distributors to ensure that these good supply practices are being upheld. We're happy to help verify that your distributor is up to standard. And we can also help you ensure that your distributor is submitting they're actually conducting their self-inspections and submitting their reports as required. So that's the good supply practice. Obviously, there are some impacts for yourselves. Obviously, you need to be undertaking very good due diligence before selecting a distributor. So you should be undertaking a GSP audit before selecting your distributor. There are likely to be, as I've mentioned, NMPA inspections, which may have an impact on reducing the number of available distributors in the marketplace. So you need to be aware of that. And also, it may be wise to be considering appointing an independent legal agent who can allow registrations to be undertaken independent of a distributor, because this allows you to act independent of your distributor for your registrations, in that you can remove a distributor who is not complying with such standards in case of sanctions by the NMPA. That means that your market access won't be affected. And it also means you can add new distributors to avoid any loss of access to the market. So it's something to be very much aware of, that there is potentially considerable impact for manufacturers because of this new standard. Looking now to other regulatory updates, the radio frequency device was actually introduced. There was a change that was introduced back in March of 2022. So due to some irregularities in the market. And the NMPA issued new requirements for the regulation of radio frequency beauty devices, particularly those that introduce physiological changes to skin and subcutaneous tissues. So any devices that are used for example, acne treatment or scar fat reduction or skin tightening. So these are actually now classified as a class 3 medical device. And you may wonder why we're mentioning this today, is that there is the transition period is actually coming to a close. So that will be closing on April the 1st, 2026. Now, certain products should already be in the process of applying for the medical device class 3 registration, because that takes actually about 21. So the action to be taking here is to contact your legal agent. Another item that was introduced earlier this year, back in March, is the usability engineering guidelines. This is a document on how to prepare the usability engineering information regarding your medical device, which is to accompany the registration of your device in China. It impacts class 2 and class 3 devices. Now, there is a pilot list of high-risk products that you can see here on the screen that actually came into effect on October the 8th. Now, as with other usability engineering documentation elsewhere in the world, it requires you to detail the uses, the usage scenario, interface and verification and validation, process flow charts, etc. But obviously is of particular importance for imported devices, is that you must consider if there is any difference between the interface or usage scenarios that differ between the domestic Chinese market and the foreign market. So how that potentially could be impacted between users because of cultural differences or language differences, etc. So for those products that are already on the market, there is no need to submit any usability engineering research when making, for example, a filing or registration or renewal of your product, unless there is a substantive change in the usability engineering of your product. So again, please reach out to your legal agent to see how this potential guideline could affect your product. Now we come to the GB standards, which covers medical electrical equipment. This has had a lot of coverage over the last few years, as it is a standard change that has affected and continues to affect a lot of devices. So here it's just a short reminder and a quick update on the situation. So it's a standard that covers general safety requirements for protection against electrical, mechanical, radiation and overheating standards. So it can cover products with certain functionalities or intended uses, such as radiation protection, alarms, household applications, emergency aid, etc. So it covers quite a wide range of products. It was originally published back in 2020, and the original enforcement deadline is May the 1st, 2023. That gave a 3-year transition period because a lot of medical electrical equipment was required to undergo type testing to ensure that they met the new standards. And obviously type testing can take 9 months or more. And in terms of change approvals for class 2 and class 3 devices, such as meeting these new standards, can no longer happen at the same time as a registration renewal. So you must undergo your type testing first, obtain that change approval, and then submit your application for your product certificate renewal, if indeed it's coming up for renewal. So you need to plan this quite well.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in there also to add,
great.
Victoria, that a lot of customers we've talked to and helped understand this GB standard update change there are a few different scenarios and factors and ways you can analyze and look at it. First of all, are you planning on renewing the product? If not, maybe that changes your strategy. And to what extent can you justify, based on the existing documentation or standards you have, whether the new testing is required or not. But otherwise, if you plan on keeping the product in the market in the longer term, you really need to undertake this type testing. And part of the pushback for the implementation date has been because there is so many products that this affects, because it does broadly affect any electrical equipment. So I just thought I'd jump in there to add that.
Great, thanks, Hamish. So why we're mentioning it again and again this year is that there are some new product specific substandards, which you can see here on the screen, that actually come into that have new deadlines are from the 1st of January 2025. So the implications here are that you need to check whether there are specific standards that affect your particular product with implementation dates for your specific device, and ensure whether any type testing needs to be completed and any change applications and or renewals. So for example, here we have some new substandards for example, oxygen concentrators, infant radiant warmers, endoscopic equipment, and high frequency surgical equipment and accessories. So as you can see, the categories are very broad. So as you can see, the implications is really contact your legal agent and ensure that you are meeting the standards and the deadlines to ensure that you retain your market access. Okay, so let's move on to the next major regulatory points. So here we have a few points that I just want to highlight. Is that back in January, there was a guideline released by the Centre for Medical Device Evaluation on how to design research for real-world evidence. And this gives you some general requirements on how to design the statistical analysis of real-world studies. This doesn't cover IVDs, just medical devices as supporting evidence for your registration applications. So indeed, if you're thinking of collecting real-world evidence or undertaking real-world studies, you should consult this guidelines to ensure that your data meets the NMPA requirements. There was also a guideline or information clarified on clinical evaluation pathways back in March and April of this year. So there are 22 medical device categories that have been clarified now, and that covers some examples of surgical navigation systems or ex vivo organ perfusion transportation devices. So this is basically due to advancements in product research and registration application submissions. So it makes it clearer that clinical evaluation pathways, so that you may or may not actually require a clinical trial in China for certain products. So again, consult with your legal agent as to whether a clinical trial is required for those products. Back in May, the China IVD reagent classification catalogue was issued and updated with new specific subcategories for high-risk class 3 products. So it now contains specific and detailed rules for product reclassification and recertification. So again, do contact your legal agent to see how this could potentially affect your products. So it now excludes reagents for blood screening and those labeled with radionuclides. And finally, something that we would like to just mention is that back in June, there was a temporary import of class 2 and class 3 devices for urgent clinical need in China. So there were guidelines released regarding if you have been contacted or you're working with a hospital or a clinic that has identified a urgently needed device to treat or prevent life-threatening diseases, or when no other effective treatment are available in China. So such products can be imported by hospitals as long as they have a strong track record in treating such diseases. So this sort of links into potentially a possible pathway, as Hamish mentioned back at the beginning of the webinar. So again, do reach out to ourselves or your legal agent regarding this new entry method into China. So that covers the majority of the main regulatory updates. Obviously, there's a lot more going on in China than just that. So you do need to keep up to date with all the standards and regulatory updates. And that is very important from an ongoing compliance point of view. So I'll pass over now to Hamish to talk about that.
Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, and as with every jurisdiction, obtaining the marketing approval is one thing, but obtaining and maintaining the post-market compliance, vigilance activities, and other ongoing regulatory activities is equally important. And each year, the NMPA issues a medical device sampling inspection plan in the first quarter of the year. This year, there were over 60 categories of products in the sampling plan. And when companies fail such sampling inspections, these results will often be made public and can also trigger overseas factory inspections, which the NMPA has restarted this year after a COVID-induced hiatus of 5 years or so. Here you can see some of the most recent results that have been published by NMPA for the month of September 2024. These inspections cover around 17 product varieties, including semiconductor laser therapy machines, scar repair gels, high-frequency scalpels, and more. Both domestic and foreign manufacturer products are sampled, and of these samples, 24 batches did not meet the relevant standards. So you need to ensure you stay up to date with the frequently changing standards, I would say, such as the GB 9706 for electrical medical devices, to ensure you maintain your compliance in China. So with that, we bring to an end our webinar about 2024 updates and a look ahead to 2025. We'll just spend a moment to remind how we at Cisema can help. We are a regulatory affairs consultancy wholly focused on the China market, including Hong Kong. We have most of our staff in China, in Beijing, and a few other cities who are speaking to the authorities every day, supporting for product submission in the pre-registration area through to submission and through to post-market as well. Some of the key service points we've set out on the slide, like evaluating the relevant feasibility for entering the market, for going down one of these map buckets that we presented earlier, acting in the legal agent or local agent role, preparing dossier, running clinical trials, even if that's needed, although we would first try to find a way to utilize your existing data to support the registration. GBA support, Hong Kong registration or listings, through to various audit activities, vigilance activities in the post-market phase. And if you're interested to know more, please get in touch. On our final slide here, we have some QR codes which you can scan. Please reach out to either Victoria or myself by email or follow up on our website. Thank you very much for your time and have a happy festive season in 2025.
Thank you very much.